Good morning, and I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Board of Selectmen meeting for Monday, November 18, 2019 to order. Charlie, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 2, public forum. Anyone wishing to address the board in public forum? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 3, and that's to approve minutes. 3.1 would be the November 4th, 2019 regular meeting minutes. Does anyone have any corrections, questions, concerns?
I'll move it.
I had one very minor that,
Second, any other?
yeah, the heading still says agenda, Tracy, instead of, yeah, that's
Minutes.
it, that's all.
Excellent. If nothing further, call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Item 4, Finance Director Mary Jane Malavasi will present the monthly report for October.
Morning.
Good morning.
Start with revenue this morning. Overall, we're trending average of where we typically are this year. I just wanted to make note of a couple things. The building department appears to be lower than prior years, but as you can see, it's right on track where we should be in October. If you're budgeting monthly, they're at 32%. We're at 33% through the year, so I'm not sure we've seen the implementation of the new fees hit in the revenue yet.
We would,
So
October 18th was the
so-
effective date.
Right,
Wow.
so, that should grow when that happens. The only thing I wanted to really note is state funding. Since the bonding package wasn't adopted, we currently don't have funding for Town Aid Road, LoSiP, and grants for municipal projects. The town engineer has already made adjustments to her schedule for the LoSiP project, since that goes to a special fund, it doesn't come into our general fund. But at this point, between the Town Aid Road and the grants for municipal projects, we're looking at $425,000. I have been in contact with CCM each month. They still expect the package will be adopted at some point in the near future, but at this point, we don't know when. So I just want to make sure I bring that to your attention as a possibility.
Can you spell tolls? That's what's holding the whole thing
Right.
up.
I just felt I needed to bring that to your attention,
Yeah.
because it is a potential $425,000 hole, which we're not expecting we'll have,
Right.
but the possibility is on the table. So that's what I have on revenue at this point.
Just one comment on that, and Janice should pay attention as well, not pay attention, but listen. If those projects are of substantial need and we need to move forward with them, we do have a substantial amount of fund balance that we can use and basically borrow from in order to complete those projects. So I wouldn't hesitate if these projects are, if you're holding off on them, but they need to get done, I would use.
I think we intend to speak
so-
about the projects during the capital presentations,
Gotcha.
so we'll have an opportunity to,
Fine.
is that correct, Janice? Right, that's what we had decided that we
Thank-
would, so
Good.
during
You're-
that,
you're already
on
way-
Thursday.
way ahead of me.
On
Way ahead.
Thursday, we'll have an opportunity to discuss that if that
Good.
is necessary.
Excellent.
Okay,
All right.
any other revenue questions?
Nope.
On the expenses, so the town is at 49.7%, which is almost exactly where we were at this point last year. It will be coming soon, most likely in January, to this board and the Board of Finance with the transfer of fund balance to cover the debt
Yes.
principals.
Oh, right.
We have the energy performance contract lease in our debt. That lease will be paid in January. Once that is complete, it'll, we'll make this budget whole. I just wanna make sure we only come back for one
One
time.
time, right.
So I'm waiting till January. If you're wondering why I'm leaving that overdrawn for so long, that's the reason.
Okay, good.
Other than that, the budgets seem to be on track, unless anybody has any particular specific questions or comments.
I don't.
No.
Anyone else?
Looks smooth.
Good.
So medical report,
Medical?
oh, unless anybody has questions on any of the warrants.
Warrants, I didn't.
I'm sorry.
You'll get those tonight.
So on the medical fund, October was, we had a bump in claims in October. That came in over our monthly budgeted amount, still leaving us, under budget at this point. And again, I'll just stress that the HSAs, the employees are paying their HSA portions at this point, so we do expect the larger months to come later on.
And is that-
Revenues,
The expenses, that also sort of the rebalancing from July and August? Is there any
it
of that
could
in
be,
there?
it's possible, most of that happened in September, but there could have been some
Okay.
that from, the end of September or so that came in October.
Gotcha.
It's possible, yes. Revenues are doing well. We have, as of October, tapped into our ISL at about $50,000,
Great.
so. Is that a big jump from September to October in
Yep.
claims over 75,000?
I'll say.
Mhm.
Good.
That's all I have for you today.
Excellent. And the fund balance is net of the money that we have allocated?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
It's already out of the,
The
yes.
1 million.
Yes, that came out for June 30, so that is,
Gotcha.
yep.
Okay. So we're still projecting
You're still
to
projecting.
be nearly $5 million in that
Correct.
account. Okay. Okay. All right. I'm good. Anyone else? Any other questions?
That's great.
None?
Thank you.
Thank you.
5, Board of Ed Director of Operations, Cliff Gurnham, not here, so we're gonna give him a pass. At this point, why don't we add in as 4A, an item from Janice Blazek, town engineer, which is the award of a survey services for the Goose Lane reconstruction project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Janet,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So as you know, we've been underway with a design for Nut Plains. I'll be meeting with the engineer who's doing that design, Mike Ott, who's the on-call civil engineer from the standing building committee's choice last year. And his company is called Summerhill Civil Engineer. So he's doing the design for Nut Plains. But we are going to do the design in-house for Goose Lane. Funding for the construction is the Lot SIP program through the
Yeah.
state, which is also bonded money. And we want to proceed with getting the survey underway so that we can start design soon thereafter. But in interest of making sure we're, getting the best value for the town, we did reach out to 2 other survey companies to get proposals from them as well on what needed to be done for the survey services. And Summerhill did still come in as the low proposer. We did get pricing from Criscolo Engineering and Anderson Engineering and Surveying here in town. And so the lowest proposal was the $29,960 from Summerhill. And that's all the necessary survey services for that project.
Everything.
Good.
On the part that the town is going to do,
Mm-hmm.
are there any deep issues? Are there any water courses around there?
Yeah, there's some, so we will have to engage a soil scientist to flag any wetlands and water courses that will be within the area of work for the project, and including any drainage impacts that we may have to
And
address.
that's under control with our agreement with them and everything?
I'm
That's
sorry.
under control with our agreement with DEEP and all of that?
Yeah, these are all inland waters, so they're likely just gonna require permitting through our Inland Wetlands
Okay, I
Commission,
just
similar
didn't
to
know if we
Nut
needed
Plains.
backup or any
Yeah,
of that.
and then we'll
Good-
do
good
any
question.
necessary stormwater permitting through DEEP will also
And
be
people- okay.
included.
Third-party sign-offs if necessary and all of that.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, we're beyond that. That is no longer, it's no longer part of the,
Well, I know, but we just want
consent.
to,
But it's a good question.
optics.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Janice, could you just, for a moment, talk about the 2 types of funding? We heard low zip money,
Right.
I mentioned earlier, and this is lot zip money.
Right.
For the benefit of those in the audience or the viewing public. And also, maybe some numbers
There's
here.
only one letter difference.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
difference.
there's one letter difference.
I know, I confuse it on my computer folder all the time.
That's right.
So LOTSIP is a program that the state DOT would funnel money as required from the federal government to local roads through what used to be the urban program. And it's funneled through COG and then to the member towns of each COG. A few years back, any federal funding, the way it's administered through Connecticut DOT is very onerous in terms of how it needs to be designed, budgeted, inspected, and all the rest. So DOT heard the complaints from, the towns that doing this type of project on a local road is kind of onerous and kind of includes a lot of, in our opinions, wasteful money. And it also takes a lot of time. The DOT came up with an idea to, rather than funnel the federal funds to this towns for their local roads, that they would utilize them themselves in the COG for their roads or projects that they want to do within the COG, still in compliance with the urban funding program, and instead supplement that money with grant monies through bonded money, state bonded money. And then they created a process to apply for those funds. Those funds you apply through your COG, and the COG itself decides the priorities and approves the projects. And there's a 5-year plan that we maintain at the Transportation Committee and at the COG level of all the projects that will be funded through this funding source. It is a little easier in terms of the execution of the projects. You do have to have a design done. There's an application form that has to be submitted to DOT. They do review the projects and make comments on them in the design phase. But then once they're okay with it and give you a letter of funding for the project, then it's yours to execute with the state bonded funds, similar to the way they allow us the LoCIP money for us to manage the projects ourselves and not kind of do their whole, inspection process. It's kind of complicated. We can do our own, process to ensure the quality of the project.
Right, and we go back to the value of some of the organizations we belong to. The Council of Governments is the venue by which these monies are distributed. So no longer do you have to stand in line at the state or for the federal dollars. You work cooperatively with your Council of Governments, and in the 2 years that I've been on that, I think it's a pretty effective way to do business. Everybody outlines their projects, and there is New Haven obviously will get the lion's share based on the size and the volume, but everyone gets a seat at the table. Everybody gets, and that's the methodology. So every community is taken care of, and we've had some success with that program as well.
Right,
So,
right.
And Janice sits on the Transportation Committee with several of her peers, other town engineers, and a lot of the work gets done at the Transportation Committee level. They make the determinations and recommendations to the elected officials who constitute the traditional COG meeting. So,
This is a terrible question, but do you know the actual words behind the acronyms of LoCIP? And is it local? Is it
Yeah,
starting
it's
out
local
with
transportation improvement capital.
Okay.
Capital improvement.
Yeah,
Okay.
capital improvement
Okay,
plan.
thank you.
They inserted
Whereas,
transportation.
yeah, they inserted the word, the T is the transportation, whereas LoCIP without the
It's
T,
just
it's just
local
local
capital.
capital improvement, because you can use LoCIP monies for
Alright.
more than just transportation projects.
Got it.
So I have a question about the particular project on this Goose Lane as it's described here, 8,000 feet. So is there any consideration of either bike lane, just striping a bike lane along the road or widening the shoulder or any, is it under consideration in any way?
Well, we don't have any identification of a priority for anything there, and it wouldn't connect to anything on Nut Plains. What we're considering with Nut Plains and potentially Goose Lane is to have some shoulder of the road and potentially striping it so we have more narrow lanes, like 11-foot lanes, and then whatever room we can have for, a shoulder with a white fog line striped. Currently, it looks like Nut Plains is likely going to turn into a 26-foot wide road. So we'll have two 11-foot lanes, which is 22 feet, and then you'll have the 2-foot shoulders on either side of it. That may be what we continue down through Goose Lane.
One of the challenges with widening the road is you widen it, you create a speedway.
Yeah, I get it.
So that's a significant challenge,
Right.
and that's
Is
one of the
there-
design
yeah.
considerations.
Yeah.
In the design considerations, are there speed control things that, other than bumps and stuff, I mean, what are you gonna do? I mean, you hit it on the head, I mean,
Right.
you make the road better, you make it faster.
Yeah.
Well, the lane narrowing is the
Yeah, that-
traditional engineering technique
Is-
to slow
well,
traffic
yeah.
down, because people, in a tighter situation, the natural reaction is to go slower.
Yeah, but that causes accidents. Yeah. And that planes is already problematic, I mean, that's the issue.
But the roadway needs attention, it's a major
Oh,
feeder
yeah,
route.
yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, the main things we're having problems with the roads right now is, drainage is a problem on portions of Nut Plains, it's so flat. And there are some sightline issues on Goose as well. So, those challenges have to be addressed as well. We haven't gotten into, obviously we have to get into survey and then design on Goose, but we're kind of getting to a point where we can go for permitting and public information meeting on Nut Plains sometime soon.
Right, so I just, part of their thinking, though, is they're surveying this and ultimately designing it, is that there's potentially multi-use roads, at least bicycles.
Right,
And this is an opportunity to do that, and it sounds like that's under consideration in
yeah, I mean, it's
surveys
not a
in your office.
dedicated bike lane or
Right.
anything at this point. I'm not aware that is something that would necessarily be supported, because then you'd be widening the road that much more.
Understood.
But we are trying to consider ways to at least provide some area of safety
Mhm.
for sharing the road. And then if there's potential for future expansion, you'll have at least that much pavement width to begin to work with.
Sure, I mean, just even the idea of having 2 feet inside of the fog line would be
Well-
well received by a lot of folks.
Yeah, even adding a fog line actually helps a lot in terms of keeping the road, the driving lane more narrow than the full width.
Width, right.
Otherwise, you'd end up with a 13-foot wide.
Right.
And then once, if painting like that goes in, if the painted fog line goes in, how often does that require maintenance?
Well, if you do it with the epoxy, it should last several years. If you just do it with the typical road paint that you see, that sometimes they have to be refreshed almost every year to 2 years, especially with the plow activities, But we'll opt to go with the epoxy painting so that it then will last longer and then will need to be refreshed less often.
Great.
How much pedestrian activity is there actually around Yale and that end of Goose Lane? I know
The
we've
southern
built some sidewalks and stuff.
So we won't be including that section, that's
I
actually a
understand that.
state
I'm just
road.
wondering, yeah.
Oh, that's a state road at that point?
Yeah,
Because of the
because of the
turnpike.
interchange. We'll be ending our paving just at, is that Carter?
That's what it says on
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so,
Is that where State Road ends?
yes. Yeah, there's
I
an
did not
address.
know that.
No, it's
I
interesting.
know, that's
Yeah.
interesting, just a little stub
But
of
the town does have sidewalks on Goose Lane, at least up to Clabber Hill, I believe. So they go from Clabber Hills under the underpass to
To Yale, I
to
mean, I
Route
remember,
1.
it was part of
doesn't
the construction. that
Quite make it right to Yale, but it's pretty close.
I think it makes it to the Yale property at the crosswalks, because
Yeah,
there's a bus
yeah.
stop there.
There's no, sidewalks in front
Commuter
of Yale
lot or
property.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, across the street.
Unfortunately, commuter lot was on the wrong side. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to, guess what, I remember when those were proposed or built or whatever, that there was conversations about pedestrian activity, and in my observation, I've never seen a lot of it.
No, I think the most you see is actually from the commuter parking lot crossing the road probably to Yale. And Yale folks have been in to talk with land use departments about, they're on a squeeze for parking on their site right now, looking for alternatives.
Yeah, because I always wondered about the connection over before, when there was potential on Boston Street to get a walking loop.
Right.
But it just doesn't seem to have materialized at this point.
Well, we do have grant monies for Boston Street. We just actually.
Yeah, the lower, HVAC.
Well, it'll
producer.
take you at least to Soundview, which will then connect to the sidewalk
Exactly.
system that
Right.
connects over to Yale.
Okay.
Anything further?
No?
No, we just stole some of the thunder from Thursday's meeting. Less to cover, thank you.
Okay.
Is there a motion to approve the awarding of the contract to Summerhill Civil Engineers and Land Surveyors, PC, in the amount of $29,960?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstained, recusals? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. Item 5, Board of Ed. Cliff Gurnham, 5.1. Good morning, Cliff. 5.1, discuss and take possible action to contract with Nationwide Security Company to install additional card readers in 3 schools. Sounds pretty self-explanatory, but you want to give us a little bit more on that? What schools and what are we
So,
talking about?
yeah, 3 schools, Guilford Lakes, Melissa Jones, and Baldwin will receive additional card readers. As we've been doing our drills throughout the fall, we realized that access back into the building was limited. Teachers all have card swipes, they don't have necessarily exterior keys. You have to be an administrator, really, to have an exterior key. So it's in our best interest to add these card readers to allow students to get back in quickly if an event outside happens. So that's why we're asking for this. The project was reviewed by the Standing Building Committee. They recommended going with Nationwide Security. They're our present vendor for the Board of Ed. They handle all our security programs and stuff like that.
So the existing teacher ID card that works within the school building, you're saying at this point now will also work with exterior doors?
So we have certain exterior doors presently that are already programmed, so when the teacher comes in, for example, the door closest probably to their parking lot has a card reader on it. So they can scan in and enter the building that way. That keeps the building totally secure. For recess or fire drills, when we are now located at doors that are not at a parking lot, that's where we need access back into the building. So that's why we're doing this. So yes, their card key allows access, like, so, and there are a few card swipes in the building, in some of the schools, depending on what we need it for.
Okay, so once you're entitled to a card, you're gonna be entitled to access wherever there's a key.
We
Card
can
key.
actually limit where you have access, point to point.
Wow.
We can limit your time frame, so teachers have a certain window that they can get in the school and use their cards. After that, they
Does
become
somebody have
disabled.
to actually, is that something that actively is managed, or you just
Yep.
plug it in?
So I have all the schedules and everything else, so if somebody happens to
Sound like almost a
retire
full-time
or
job.
leave, we can
Yeah.
instantly disable their card.
Well, yeah, that kind of
That's the
stuff,
thing.
but
So
I
we
mean,
can,
yeah.
it's very flexible, allows us much better control over the whole, versus handing out actual keys to the building.
Well, I'm just concerned about a loss, it doesn't matter, it already exists, so.
Do you have policies when you hand out a card, they have to acknowledge that they've received the card and?
There's a fee if you lose the card. We do try to get them back, but it's not the end of the world because we can disable them so quickly.
Quickly.
Yeah.
Good.
So we're looking for approval for awarding to Nationwide for $15,171.07.
7 cents, good. Someone want to put that before the motion? Second.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstaining, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. 5.2, consider and take possible action to approve a change order number 10 for the Baldwin Middle School HVAC project. Cliff, you want to go into this? I think maybe more than one of us are concerned about the significant number of change orders on this particular project. I know we've addressed it somewhat in the past at this meeting, but you want to go into a little more detail?
Sure. So, and I did send a response to Pam because she inquired it as well. So there's been 10 potential change orders.
Sure.
2 or 3 of those have been declined. So when you see 10,
It's just the
it doesn't mean that they've all been approved, that's just the number that we're on, so that we can track them. So some of the change orders are a change because of Board of Ed requests or changes. So I'd say about half of these. So out of, I think we've had 7 or 8 actual change orders that have been approved. This would be the 7th or 8th. Half of those are requested by the Board of Ed. So, for example, they designed a new classroom in the spring of last year, right before we got out of school. So we created a new classroom on the second floor. We've actually did 2 classrooms. So by doing so, creating a new classroom, we've now had to change the HVAC system so that we can, direct air appropriately and control air to the classroom versus the space that it was prior. And that's actually included in this change order here. So when we do that, when we make a change to the building, that's beyond the scope of the original project, obviously. So the other thing that we noticed that's actually included in here was the orchestra room doesn't have return ventilation, which is very strange. And again, it was something when we got into the project and we were going through it in the late spring, we were doing a different project actually in the classroom, and that's when we realized that there was no return. And every space should have a return to allow the flow properly through that space. So noting that, again, it wasn't in the scope, but it was a perfect time to fix the situation. So we've added this to this change order, asking the contractor to fix that problem. So that's where some of these come, but half of them are induced by us, the Board of Ed, for a change that we have made or something that we found that we want corrected that may not have been in the scope.
Can you give me an example of a declined change order?
Yep, so a perfect example was the chiller pipe, when we talked about putting a chiller pipe in the ground, and it was gonna be over about 100,000 to bury the chiller pipe. The Standing Building Committee reviewed that, said, well, let's take a look at maybe doing this a different way. That's when we rerouted up over the roof to where we needed to go. I think the change order was 20,000 or something versus 100 and something. So there's a perfect example of a change order that was declined because we could better engineer it or find a better way of doing it, so.
So it wasn't declined, it was changed.
Well, that one specific, we
Modified.
call it declined, and a new one was developed because of, we found it.
Has there ever been a change order decline?
Well, that one, for
Just
example.
just outright.
That one,
Without-
oh,
without
outright?
something being
Right.
developed.
There has, most of the time it's declined because it may be within the scope. So they may try to put a change order and then we decline it. We have declined stuff just because maybe it wasn't in the scope and something we don't want to do as part of this project.
Well, that's what I was
But, yeah. It's
trying
rare
to see,
when that
is there
happens.
actually anything like that?
If it was-
I mean, something like what you discussed about the chiller pipe,
Yep.
frankly, in my perspective, is that should have been part of the initial construction. I mean, you knew you needed a chiller pipe, where were you gonna put it? And it just got left off to keep it within a budget.
Well, where we routed it originally wouldn't work without extensive
Well, that's an
structural-
engineering
Right.
failure.
Yeah, right. So,
Okay, I understand.
Just Cliff, just as a, try to scale this, the total value of this project,
I believe it was about $1.6 million.
is 10 change orders on a project of that size and scope unusual?
No, I think it's, relative, again, because half of those were ours, so you'd
Right.
say maybe 5, 3, I'd say probably 4 were induced by the project itself.
Gotcha.
It's not that, and most of them were not very large.
Not large, no.
And one of those actually that
Something
hasn't
like the
been approved.
classrooms makes sense. I
Sense,
mean,
yeah,
as they're
yeah.
moving forward,
Yeah,
that's a
it's
change
changed.
order. I
Yeah.
mean, that's,
Well,
you
we've all-
didn't know that when they were designing the original design.
So we also, one of the change orders that hasn't been approved by the Standing Building Committee is actually a credit, which will range somewhere between $6,000
We like
and
those.
$14,000. So
We get them more of
it's
those.
not always a negative. It sometimes is a positive for us.
Positive, right.
So when we say we've had 7 change orders, one's a positive.
Right.
It's not all bad news. So again, and you guys won't see that because it's a smaller change order, so you may not have to approve it. So.
Also, this is has not been a routine project. I mean, it's not like replacing a roof that we've already replaced 3 times.
Right.
This is a different animal, and you
Correct.
figure things out as you go to an extent.
It was a very, this one and phase 2, both will be very complex projects, just because we're changing the whole system. It's not a one-for-one replacement. We
Yeah.
changed the type of equipment that was in there that runs differently and controls the whole system differently, so that we'll have better ventilation, dehumidification, things like that we couldn't get out of the old system. So it should be much, better as far as what we have in there, so.
Yeah.
How was the whole
Complicated.
project going time-wise?
It's right on schedule. We knew it was gonna run into the fall, so they expect it to be buttoned up before Christmas, so we only have about another week or two worth of real construction, and then it's all finishing up control work, so we're getting there.
Good.
And then phase 2 is under design now.
Good. Anything further? All right, we have a motion, do we have a motion to award the contract to Save More Cooling Heating, Inc. in the amount of $30,581.18.
I'll make the motion.
In a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, abstaining, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Item 6, Fire Chief Charlie Hershaft. Morning, Charlie.
Good morning.
And Charlie's going to ask us to waive bidding due to sole source, the purchase of Scott Air Packs from Shipments Fire Equipment, once again, due to it being a sole source vendor. Did I take away your thunder here?
Yeah, I think
You got it. This is phase 3 of the one more remaining phase of replacing not all our air cylinders, but 100 of them. Shipments is the sole source vendor for Scott's, and the price is $28,858.75.
Bingo. Someone want to put that in the form of a motion?
so moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion, questions, et cetera?
What's the lifespan of these things?
15 years.
Thank you.
Good.
Did you say this is the third and final of this cycle?
No, one more.
One more.
Oh, yeah. Got one more cycle.
And then after this cycle is complete, when does the cycle start again?
15 years.
Well,
Oh,
13.
literally?
So-
Yeah, it would be, yeah, it'd be
13, yeah.
10 years from now. Yeah,
Time flies, huh?
yes, it does.
Wait, do you remember approving the first cycle, Chuck? Actually, so do I, because I was on a different board.
Yeah.
All right, there's no further discussion. Call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Charles.
Item 7, Human Resources Director, Mitch Goldblatt, who is going to discuss the employee vehicle usage policy.
Yes, we have a new policy for vehicle usage, which is much more extensive than what's in the current personnel policy manual. Certain things have brought to light that we should update this, and I've worked with both in-house counsel Pam Millman, as well as our insurance consultant, H.D. Seeger, to come up with a policy that is before you today for hopefully approval.
One, if I could interject here, one of the reasons that we went back to look at this, other than the fact that occasionally we look at policies and procedures, was related to the use of personal vehicles to facilitate town business. Because there are occasions where individuals use their own vehicle to conduct town business because a vehicle is not available, or they leave directly from their home, going to conferences, those kind of things, where it makes more sense to do so. So that's precipitated a change.
So quite often it's just going from building to building, but yes, it's all, when someone is going to a conference, as Matt has mentioned, or even to building, using your own vehicle, we want to make sure everybody's following the policy for our protection and their own protection.
Right. It was largely for their protection that we were concerned about. And there are certain insurance requirements, et cetera, that they need to.
Exactly.
Need to have.
Do they get their insurance requirements pre-approved before they use their cars, or is that part of employment?
No, they don't have it, well, certain people who have to drive town vehicles all the time have to have, a current license and the type of license that's necessary for driving that vehicle. As far as just driving your own vehicle, we just have it in here now as a policy. We're not gonna go to try and check and keep up with every single employee to make sure they've got that, but they are now responsible for knowing that, based on the policy.
Good.
So you're not checking to make sure someone has the right insurance?
Not
unless it's
checking for
your-
someone, maybe just an office worker who's just using their own vehicle once in a while, or, you know, regularly even, you know, they now will have this information, everyone will have this information as well as new employees. The people we do keep up with, though, are the people that have as part of their job description a requirement
I see.
to be able to drive a vehicle. And a lot of times that's even more specific into the type of vehicle, whether it's a passenger bus for our bus drivers at Parks and Rec, or of course the people at Public Works in their facilities and the type of vehicles that they drive, usually requiring a CDL license.
But to the question of verifying the insurance requirements, which I think was Charlie's first question, we do not do that.
No.
We are defining what they need to have in order for themselves to be protected and have coverage because of the limits, potential limits of the town liability insurance. So this gives them fair warning that if they are using a town vehicle, that there are some things that they need to accommodate themselves and certain requirements.
And I would say, we contacted Seeger, our insurance agent, and they were very particular about suggesting to the employees, which is in this policy, that they should check with their own insurance company, because sometimes if they're using their personal car on business, there might be a gap in coverage there, so they ought to meet with their insurance companies and make sure they have that endorsement in some cases needed.
I have a couple other questions on the
Sure.
personal vehicle section there. So, because there's one standalone here, it says use of motorcycles as personal vehicles is prohibited. And I guess I understand what the point you're getting at. So if somebody happens to have a motorcycle, they're not allowed to use it for town business.
Correct.
Which it doesn't exactly say. Use of motorcycles as personal vehicles, use of motorcycles in the course of town business.
Well, it's listed under the personal vehicle requirements under the vehicle uses policy, so think it all
To
falls
conduct town
together.
business, okay. And, okay, all right, I guess, like, so you read the entire 3 paragraphs. And that doesn't apply to, like, for instance, a police motorcycle. if they have
No,
one.
that's
a
totally
town
separate,
vehicle.
that town vehicle, yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
It's probably a silly question, but I've noticed some of the equipment, in particular Public Works and Park and Rec, are registered vehicles. You know, I'm talking about equipment, lawnmowers and tractors and things like that. Are they all covered too, same way?
Oh, that's different, those
That's
are
town.
all, those are, as the town vehicles, those are all covered on our insurance policy. We have a policy that delineates every single vehicle that the town has registered, and we make sure it's covered, and we go through that pretty regularly, every time a vehicle is either bought or sold, or disposed of in any way, and update KERMA with that information.
Yeah, I noticed like even lawnmowers, a few of them have license plates on them.
Yep.
Depending on the size, and Rick's here, depending on the size,
Tom.
Tom's here as well, depending on the size of the lawnmower and whether it's used over the
Going
over the
between
road.
fields
Yep.
and stuff like that.
It needs to be registered, yeah.
Those are the bane of commuters all around town, as they get caught behind one on Route 77 trying to get to work in a timely fashion. But most of the time, they pull over to the side and let people go.
Yeah.
Most of the time, so. All right, anything further on the vehicle usage policy? All right, is there a motion to adopt the updated vehicle usage policy?
So moved.
A second. Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Mitch, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll probably be seeing more of Mitch as we are going through the personnel policy manual for updates to reflect the age in which we live.
Okay.
Isn't that something? How many places do you think that appears? A lot.
Item 8, Parks and Rec Director Rick Maynard is going to ask us to consider the possible award of bid number 3-1920, Nathaniel Green Community Center, Whitfield Room Ceiling Tile Upgrade. Among other things, he has another item as well, but, Rick?
Morning. So we went out to bid for the ceiling
Morning,
tile
Rose.
upgrade, and we had 2 bidders. There were, I think, 4 or 5 companies, and we had the walkthrough, the mandatory walkthrough, but 2 bid on it. And it was quite a range. The high bid was $198,900. Low bid was $87,000. And that's pretty close to what we originally estimated it was gonna cost, maybe off by about 7,000 or so, but it was close. So we asked the Silver Petrocelli as our architects, and we asked them to check the references to make sure they were good, and they came back really solid. So we've been in conversation with the low bidder, which is Plord Enterprises. They would like to start soon, right after Thanksgiving, like either that Thanksgiving weekend or Monday the 2nd. Assuming you award the bid to them, the only thing we gotta make sure everyone understands, there will be some disruption, because we have programs still going on, and we have a schedule that we've worked out with them, full schedule that's gonna go into the contract. I said to Pam and Jeff Sinafrio on Friday, to let them know they're, for example, some days they might not be able to be in there until after 3 o'clock. There's the Rotary lunch for the seniors, for example. But they really wanna come in early, which is good for us, because the later they start, we've already pushed back our start of our winter programs to the end of January. We usually start around January 4th. So we get them in earlier. We have a schedule we worked out. But, you know, there will be some groups in there who'll look up and there'll be no ceiling tiles, you know. But as long as it's safe and they clean up after, and we can still go in and use the room as we need it. So we would like to recommend that the Board of Selectmen approve Plord Enterprises for the $87,000. And that's for both the Guilford room and the Whitfield room.
Is it a new design?
It's a little different. The tiles are different from what's there now. So what we put
I'm
into
not
the
worried
specs-
about the look, I'm worried about,
Are they ball-proof?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
better than what we have.
okay. that's
And
it.
acoustically, they're better.
And acoustically, they're gonna be better,
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had discussed the possibility of some drop-down netting to protect those ceiling tiles. Have you guys made any progress in looking at that?
Yeah, we did talk about that with another architect at one point, and they just thought that it would impact the whole aesthetics of the room. But these tiles that they're gonna put in, they have clips on the back of them,
Right.
up in the ceiling, so that if a basketball hits it, it's not gonna pop up, the
Okay.
clip will hold it down.
All right.
And so we think it's gonna be a much better
Yeah.
system. than
And they
we
won't
have.
slide down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Let you know. Do you want a motion?
Yeah, motion to award.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second.
Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Item 8.2, that would be receive a request from Park and Recreation to draft an ordinance governing parking lots, in particular those located at Lake Quanapug and Jacobs Beach. Rick, Rose, you just want to talk a little bit about what precipitated this?
What precipitated this is a few times this summer when I went to just sort of check and see what was happening at our beaches and parks, there are people who are picnicking in the parking lot. And my concern especially was, it's nice to picnic here, the cars are here, but the kids are running back and
Back
forth,
right?
back and forth, and it just scared me to death.
Okay.
We do have signs up, but they don't really pay attention to the
Attention to it,
signs.
okay.
The other problem, one of our other commission members had told me about, is that they do a lot of cooking out there. And they'll often just dump their ashes.
right there.
And again, you have kids running around. This is a beach,
Barefoot.
so a lot of them have no shoes on. And quite honestly, when I think about it, I think all of our parking lots should not have picnicking.
Right.
I mean, it's unsafe for all the kids.
Makes
So
sense.
we really felt that we needed to come to you for that.
Good. All right.
So, if we vote on this as written by the commission, there's no grilling at Lake Quanapug?
No, we
In the
This is-
park,
Parking lot, yeah, that's what I wanted to.
we do
We're-
have that whole green area, and that's where we'd like people to picnic, is in the, as you come into the right,
Yes.
all of that is all green, it's a nice grassy area.
Yeah.
Just not where the cars are parked.
Okay.
We'll be cooperatively working out the details of the restrictions for the use of the parking lot with the Park and Rec Commission and Town Council. It will come back to this board.
We're not making
for-
this final decision.
No, this is just a.
Just a request that you
Take
look at it.
Just to move
Okay.
forward, so.
All right, and then, and then I'm more familiar with Jacobs Beach, so there is allowed grilling at Jacobs Beach?
Not in the parking lot, but
Not,
yes.
but at another
Oh,
Oh,
location?
absolutely, we
Okay.
don't wanna
I
keep
just
people,
wanted to be
Cindy, we don't wanna keep people from picnicking there, we just don't want it where the cars are.
And there are a lot of areas at Quanapug too. There's a grassy area. It's just,
Yeah.
as
Right. I just,
said,
from reading this, I just
Yeah.
wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason Park and Rec has come to us with a formal request is that they have authority over the recreation facility, the park, the beach, et cetera. The Board of Selectmen has jurisdiction over the parking lots. Otherwise, they would have implemented their own policy related to the parking lot. We will be doing this in conjunction with them.
So if I could just add, under the current ordinance, parks and public places, you are the governing agency and you're allowed to make rules and regulations pertaining to the parking areas.
Right.
So we wouldn't need an ordinance change. You know, I think a more flexible way would be, you'd be setting up a set of rules and regulations that govern the parking lot, just like you have for the green.
Right. Is a possible consideration, and I should have asked you this before,
Yeah.
but is a possible consideration that this board could cede control of those specific parking lots to Park and Recreation?
That would definitely require an ordinance change.
An ordinance change, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Are we all done with that part of it? Well, I was listening to your meeting the other day, and I don't know if you want to take the opportunity to address the issue of trash and people not taking out what they bring in and that type of thing. I know that was part of your discussion at your meeting, and you have an opportunity to address some more people. I was just very disappointed that it even had to be part of the conversation. I mean, so many of our citizens are so concerned about keeping our community beautiful, and to do that, even, and you were saying if I didn't, re-listen to the tape or anything, but it seemed like some of the organized teams even would bring things in and then not clean up after themselves, and that, I don't know what, in your regs, they were talking about suspending usage but I would strongly suggest to bolster that regulator.
Right.
Maybe
You
even
would think
as a
it would be
positive.
common sense that people would take care of their community and their parks.
One would think that. I just had somebody come up to me Friday at the community center, complaining that they had gone to Adams to play pickleball, and there were people out there playing with, 2 people were playing with 4 dogs, and it says no dogs on the court.
Yeah,
And
that's
people
another issue,
basically
yeah,
told
dogs too,
them
yeah.
in very, specific language, tough. And you don't know what to do. other than
Well,
say,
yeah,
call the
I
police.
mean,
What can
I
you
think
tell these
what's,
people?
the signage is problematic. I mean,
Yeah.
whether people read the signs or not, but, making the point in that whatever way possible, I would be very supportive of, because it's just so disappointing. Maybe even reaching out to some of our community organizations that use the fields
Right.
just isn't right. The amount of money that we have to spend
To pick
cleaning
up.
up after people just isn't right.
Most of the fields are very good, and there was one particular field that came up at that meeting that one of our commission members mentioned. And I think what, for me, is even most perplexing is we have a trash barrel and a recycle barrel side by side. And the recycle barrel clearly says bottles and cans only. And our guys, we're doing the trash and recycling now, and I can tell you that very seldom are we recycling anything, because those the recycle barrels have trash in them.
I remember
It's
the
very
last
clear.
budget cycle, when we were talking about the
Yeah.
trucks, you pointed out that all you need is one piece of trash in a recycle barrel, and that, that's a message that's gotta get out to the community. I mean, that just isn't right. Here we are struggling to recycle and do the right thing, and, the plastic bag, all these things we're trying to do right, and then somebody's lack of, it's more than courtesy, it's just common sense. And to, you can't expect the employees to sort through every
No.
bin.
Nope.
But to have to take that recycled barrel where, let's say, 50% of the people do what's right and 1 or 2 people do what's wrong, to eliminate all of that good effort, I mean, that's a message we gotta get out there. It's
And we
just
made it
not
really clear,
right.
and Charlie, it might have been your suggestion at the meeting, I think we made it clear, it said bottles and cans only. I mean, you can be a newspaper, obviously, but people didn't know about styrofoam cups, they don't know, where do they go? So that's why on the barrel, in 3 places, top sides, it says bottles and cans only.
One of the organizations I belong to, they have the different bins, they have like 4 bins, they make us separate everything. And the openings on the top, now granted, these aren't out in the public, they were within an office, but the openings at the top only allow certain things to be dropped in. And I hate that we have to keep managing people's recycling effort. I mean, we as a community try to do what's right. Can you try to do what's right as an individual?
To that point, Charlie, I'm meeting with the Sustainable Guilford Task Force tomorrow night. That's one of the items on our agenda, which is a community-wide awareness program. We are under several state mandates to reduce our solid waste. One of the easiest ways to do that is to make sure the recycling stays out of and those are the MS4 regulations. Janice has we have to file an MS4 plan every year, and one of the components of how we reduce, because we are every municipality is obligated to reduce their solid waste over a certain period of time, and you have to show progress towards those goals, including tonnage as well as programs. So we will be implementing a community-wide awareness program. In addition, just not to go beyond it, we're also starting to take a look at composting services, food composting. There's an organization, is it Blue something or other, that now picks up compost waste within the community, and we're starting to talk about a separate composting collection point at the waste transfer station. So,
I just wanted to add, when your regulations are being violated, I don't have that ordinance in front of me, but I'm virtually certain there's some kind of enforcement piece on that. So I would just double check that maybe there's a fine, you can go at it that way.
Well, I thought the point about, not allowing people to use the field if there's a problem. I know you shake your head and it's difficult, but boy, that would send a message home pretty fast if a few of the larger athletic teams weren't able to use the field for a week.
We did that, I was gonna say about 10 or 12 years ago, there was a specific field that was being trashed, and we told them they were gonna suspend it for a week. They didn't clean up, and it cleaned up right after that.
As long as you
Well,
can
I
figure
mean,
out
you
who's
know,
doing it.
it just,
That's right, you know who's doing it.
You know
That's
who's
right,
doing
yeah.
it, that's the hard part.
it's just, that kind of stuff really,
one of the alternatives is, these organizations are required to post a deposit, or, not a bond, but a deposit. And if it turns out that they can be, it's tracked to them, well, they'll forfeit their deposit.
and you'd only have to play hardball for a while.
Yeah.
The
That's right.
message would get out there.
Message will get out,
Uh,
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Good.
Okay.
All right, the answer is yes, we will
Thank you.
entertain,
This is
we will entertain.
Yeah, thank you.
Change the ordinance, and we'll be back
We appreciate
with
it.
something formal to the board. All right.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Item 9, discuss and take possible action on the town to grant a Peddlers Park conservation easement to the Guilford Land Conservation Trust and send to Planning and Zoning Commission for mandatory referral under Connecticut General Statutes 8.24, as well as set a public hearing date of December 2nd, 2019 at 8:30 a.m. at the Town Hall, and a meeting date of December 16th, 8:15 a.m. at the Town Hall on the same issue. As way of a little bit of background, you may recall and we have Sarah Williams from Guilford Land Conservation Trust. And is Gary actually representing the trust as well? Or is he just looking for a place to hide this morning?
Well, we just want to be here for support. We don't need
Thank you. As you may recall, we had the issue with the disc golf course up at Peddlers, which is nearly 18 months ago. And it came to our attention that based on the fact that was a landfill, at one point, we made the decision that we weren't going to develop that property for fear of what happens if we did so. Shortly after that, I wound up having some conversations with the folks at the Land Trust, David Grigsby in particular, and Sarah as well. And we started discussing this idea of a conservation easement, largely because the Land Trust already has trails on portions of this property.
Exit onto it, too. That's
The
access.
park, et cetera. So, in my mind, this seemed to be a pretty good opportunity for both. It protects the investment that the Land Trust has made in their trail systems there, and also gives them the opportunity in the future to possibly expand the trails in that area if the demand is there or the opportunity is there. And in exchange for that, the Land Trust, the conservation the folks are willing to pay us $25,000 for that easement. And given the fact that we are most likely not going to use that, I think it's at any point for town purposes, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to protect that land. So that was the genesis. And Sarah, is there anything you want to add, or Gary?
Prior to public hearing, have we had conversations with the neighbors, because they were probably the most outspoken last time around?
I've had some conversations with very specific neighbors, and I think some of the folks at Land Conservation Trust have as well, and this is wildly supported. Again, it's a
I just
it's a
don't wanna
relatively
go
minor
down the-
sample.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the concerns that they had expressed at the time we were looking to develop it as a golf course.
Would this end up being potentially a parking lot?
I don't think so. That's
I think
that's not.
parking lots are
They're prohibited.
It has a parking lot.
Right.
It has a parking lot, and that's all we need.
That's it.
So the parking would not necessarily at this point in time be expanded?
I actually think there's a
No.
provision in the conservation easement that prevents it from
Prevents
being
it.
Says that.
Right.
Expanded?
expanded, yeah.
So, this may be in the document, but I just want to be clear. The land that's currently the Peddler's Park portion is no longer going to be town land?
Oh, no, it's town land.
It's
They
still
just have-
town land?
They just have an easement on it.
Okay.
So we
So-
own fee simple title, we own the title,
Okay.
and
So
we grant the.
Then we are still responsible for that portion of the property? In terms of maintaining the park?
In the park?
No, no.
It's just called
We're
a
not-
park, it's just trees.
But there
Well,
is a
what about the
parking
walkways?
lot
Who's
there.
gonna maintain a walkway if a
So
tree falls?
We've done that
That's
for
it.
53 years.
So that's our question.
Yeah.
So that'll continue that way.
Well, how about the parking now? I mean, are we gonna continue to
It's theirs.
plow it and all that?
Yep.
So in effect, you're,
Everything's the same.
Sarah, in effect, you're saying that any work that is done on the town portion has been done by, land trust?
Right, if anything has to, I think in the document it explains that if there's something that needs to be changed, like a, yeah. You want me up there?
Yeah,
No.
yes, Sarah.
Sure.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right. Right, so the document basically just writes down what's been the practice so far. So that if, if it's, right, actually, I think there might be a trail that's almost underwater part of the year now that didn't used to be, that kind of change, we would communicate with the town to fix it, to improve it. That, a conservation easement is sort of an agreement that we all reach together through many drafts to serve both entities' interests.
So why wouldn't the town simply sell it?
Sorry?
Why wouldn't the town simply sell it to you? Why is this better for either party?
Well, the land trust cannot purchase something that used to be a landfill.
Because of the landfill aspect? Okay, all right. Makes sense.
Yes, minor hurdle.
That's your landfill.
So,
Yeah. Anything further?
so there is, so the conservation easement is a document. It exists.
Yes.
And we're voting on it, but we don't have
Well,
the,
it's going to public here.
we're voting
We're
just
going-
to send it to
send it
public
to
hearing.
public hearing.
We're not doing anything else, okay.
And the essence of this is you're trying to preserve the existing use, which has been in place some 50 years. Is that the quick summary?
That's-
Yes? Thank
We
you.
don't have the easement up here on board pack?
I do.
You may have to reload.
Oh, reload it.
That
Okay.
was new.
Yeah, I loaded it last week, so,
I put the new one up,
okay.
that there was a change.
And not because I don't want to get $25,000 worth of revenue to the town, but why would the land trust pay the town the $25,000?
It's a good question. So these are some of the headwaters of Westwoods. This is sort of an entry to Westwoods that's been used for ages. In fact, I think probably most people in the community think it's already owned by the land trust because we've managed those trails. We've included it on our maps and people have used it that way for a long time. So for us, it's about contiguity and connectivity
Controlling the use going forward.
and not puncturing a landfill with any unforeseen use in the future that could then go downstream and affect the waters that we protect because they're clean.
There's value in managing the continued use this way. And to Sue's point, they can't sell it outright, so this is the sort of compromise.
Yeah, and I think it helps everyone in the community understand what the plan is for the land. I think when questions come up and people get upset about the uses, I think, sort of in terms of the town, I think most people are just sort of gonna exhale and say, okay, it's what we thought it was all along, and we can still use it the way we always have.
And it is our anticipation that that 25,000 goes back into the land acquisition fund. So,
Perfect.
It's a cyclical arrangement. Right.
All right, so what do we need, a motion to have a public hearing?
We need a motion to approve the public hearing on December 2nd and a town meeting date of December 16th, as well as the referral to planning and zoning.
So moved.
Second.
Any further questions, comments? Hearing none, call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstaining, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Sarah, thank you very
Yep,
much.
thank you.
And so the town meeting in that case will be immediately no, 8:15.
8:15, right.
8:15.
Yeah, immediately proceeding. Right.
Yep.
Item 10, excuse me. Consider and take possible action on noise control ordinance variance application for Lobster Fest taking place June 27, 2020 at the Guilford Fairgrounds, and the Sea Legs Shuffle taking place July 26, 2020 at the Guilford Fairgrounds. Anybody want to make the motion on the Lobster Fest, Lou?
I will make
There's a
that
rota-
motion.
Well, there are other ones.
We got a bunch of us here.
That's right.
I'll second it.
Second it, good. Call the question on that one. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Is there a motion on the Sea Leg Shuffle taking place July 26th at the fairgrounds as well?
I'll make that motion as well.
And a second?
Second.
Call the question, all in favor? Aye.
Aye, sorry.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining,
Sorry.
yeah, thank you very much. That motion carries. Item 11, appointments and resignations. Act on resignation received from David Williams with the Inland Wetlands Commission. Is there a motion with appreciation and regret?
Yes, so moved.
Second.
Second, and call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. 11.2, act on the appointment of Peter Golitz to the Pension Committee to replace the seat vacated by Robert Hartman for a term will sit for his first Board of Finance meeting this evening, for a term to expire November 30th, 2023. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries.
Good to see Peter back involved.
Yes, nice to see Peter back in the mix. 11.3, act on the appointment of Deborah Spalding to the Pension Committee for a term to expire November 30th, 2023. I'd like to make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Charlie, you want to take item 12, request the use of town properties?
You just
How
lost
many
that.
we got here?
I do.
4.
Well, I'll move that we invoke the Gary policy and approve, well, let's just name each one. The
Okay,
Guilford
good.
Garden Club, a sign for the Broad Street walking tour, candlelight tour on December 6th. The Country School for their open house on January 26th. Again, it's a sign. Shoreline Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of Commerce, our commission, and Park and Rec Commission for December 6th, the use of the green for tree lighting.
And a sign.
Sign,
Yeah.
again, and a request for Rotary to use the green for its annual Frosty 5K on January 1st.
Thank you for that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Call the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, recusals, hearing none, motion carries. Item 13, committee reports. Sandy?
Well, we had hoped, we meaning the Housing for Economic Development Plan Committee, had hoped to take our affordable housing plan one step further with the land transfer agreement between the Selectmen and the not-for-profit developer NeighborWorks, but that's still going to happen, but there's just some more work on both sides in getting all the contract and proposal documents correct. So I'm sorry, Kirsty, that you're here. I mean, I'm not sorry you're here. I'm sorry that you either didn't see or didn't get the memo.
I did, but I didn't take it out of my calendar.
Oh, okay.
So here I am.
So,
Nothing better to do.
I don't have a new date at this time, but our committee is meeting Thursday, and hopefully we'll be here soon.
Good. Anything on correspondence, Public Works, or Building Department? Old business? New business? Public forum? Anyone wishing to address the board in public forum? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
Second.
Call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same. Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you.
Very efficient.